Hi folks, Aaron from Passport Prep here. Last time we looked at the 5 biggest reasons your SAT math score might be stuck. So today we're going to look at the 5 biggest reasons your reading score might be getting stuck. Stay tuned and we will talk about it. Alright, number 1 reason I see that students have a reading score that's getting stuck, that's not going up as fast as they want. You're getting fooled by attractive, wrong answers. So what do I mean by that? The SAT is really good at writing answer choices that have good things in them. And so if you focus too much on what's good about an answer choice, you're going to always be going back and forth. You're going to have 2 answer choices that you get it down to, and you say, oh, well, I like A for this reason, but I like B for this reason. And I'm sure you've been in that situation, right? Where you go back and forth and back and forth. And how do I know which one's right? Well, if you're always looking for good things, then you're going to keep getting stuck in that situation. So let me give you an example. Let's say that the question was, what is Harry Potter about? Obviously not an SAT question, but let's just use it as an example. So let's say the question is, what is Harry Potter about? And I had 2 answer choices. Answer choice number 1, Harry Potter is about a young boy who discovers he's a wizard and the adventures he has with his pet alligator. And the answer number 2 that you have as an option is, Harry Potter is about a boy who grows up. So I think a lot of us would feel like the first one is really attractive. It's got a lot of good things about it. It mentions wizards, it mentions adventures, it mentions that he's a young boy who didn't know he was a wizard to begin with. And the second one seems kind of boring, kind of bland. Like, that's not really what Harry Potter is about, right? I mean, it's about all these other things. But for the purposes of the SAT, the second one is way, way better. Because the first one has that flaw in it. It has that alligator bit. And I don't think there are any alligators in Harry Potter. If there are, I'm sure I'll hear about it. So that's the way the SAT tends to get us on hard reading questions. They throw out answers that have attractive bits to them, and they hope that we like those attractive bits so much that we ignore the parts that are bad. So train yourself to not care too much about the attractive bits. Always look for those bad bits, and you will be better off on the SAT. All right, reason number 2 that your score might be getting stuck, you're reading too much between the lines. In school, that's often rewarded. You know, if we're reading A Catcher in the Rye, and you have a theory that it's really about the reaction to World War II, I don't know. Your teacher's probably going to like that. She's going to ask for more information. She's going to ask for your unique interpretation and your evidence for that unique interpretation. The SAT isn't about that at all. The SAT is not about unique interpretations. If it was, it couldn't function as a standardized test. So instead, it's about the evidence on the page, always, always, always. So what exactly does the author say? So if you're doing more than that, then you might be working too hard and getting questions wrong that you don't have to. All right, number 3. The number 3 reason I see that people have a reading score that isn't getting where they want it to be, you're reading too carefully. Now, that's strange. Aren't I always the guy who says you have to be more careful on this test? Well, yes. The one place you don't have to be as careful is when you're reading the passage on the first pass. I have a lot of students who, they open the book and they say, here's passage 1, I'm going to read it, and they take 4, 5, 6 minutes to read that passage, and they're reading really carefully. They might be underlining or highlighting, and you don't get any points for doing that. You don't get points for highlighting the passage. You don't get points for reading the passage carefully. You get points for filling in the bubbles, right? So if you're taking that much time on the first pass, then you're not giving yourself much time to do the stuff that gets you points, which is answer the questions. The first pass on the reading should probably just be for skimming. Get a basic idea of what the author's point is, maybe a brief map of what each paragraph is about, and then get to the questions, because the questions is where you're going to actually get your points. So that's number 3. You might be reading too carefully. You might be taking too much time on that first pass to read the passage and not giving yourself enough time for the actual questions. Number 4, kind of similar to the last one I was talking about, you might be focusing too much on the passage instead of the questions. And whereas before I was talking about when you're reading it first, it often happens when people are doing questions as well. So they'll read the question and they'll quickly go back to the passage, and then they'll spend a long time in the passage sort of thinking and saying, what does the author really mean here? You absolutely should be going back to the passage for evidence, but you shouldn't be going back to wonder about sort of what the author means. Find out what the author says and deal with it that way. The other thing that's often out of balance is that people are not being as careful with the questions and answers as they are with the passage. They're reading the passage really carefully, but when they get to the answer choices, they're just kind of going through quickly to see what sounds good. And if anything, it should be the reverse. if you understand the questions and answers really, really well, then you have a much better chance to get the question right. Because these questions are not about the depth of the passage, they're about details. And so all you need to do is say which answer choice matches up with the details in the passage. And to do that, you have to understand the questions, you have to understand the answers. So if you're blazing through the questions and answers, just saying what feels right, you're probably going too fast there. And you're probably missing points because of that. Number five reason that your reading score might be stuck, you haven't found your personal reading style yet. So there's basically two reading styles that work on this test. Number one, skim the passage, take about 2.5 to 3 minutes on the passage, and then goes to the questions. They're not going to take the passage away from you, so it's not like you need to really memorize the passage, and you are going to go back for the details you need. Once you find out what the questions are asking, you're going to spend more time on the passage. So spending 2.5 to 3 minutes gets you a basic idea of the passage, but it doesn't get you bogged down. So 2.5 to 3 minutes, then go to the questions, then answer the questions. That's style number one, and it usually works for most students. 75% of kids, probably that's the best option. But for a large minority of kiddos, going to the questions first makes sense. A lot of the questions will have line numbers. So you can find one that says, in line 5 or 6. Okay, great. You can go back to lines 5 and 6 and answer that particular question. Even if you haven't read the whole passage, you'll probably be able to answer that question. And by the time you do half a dozen of those, where they tell you specifically where to go, you'll understand the passage well enough to answer the big picture questions. What is the main purpose of the author, something like that. And so that's the other way to read. You can either skim, take 2.5 or 3 minutes, and then go to the questions, or you can go straight to the questions and go back to the passage for the details that you need. The way that you don't want to do it is to spend 4 or 5 minutes reading the passage before you get to the questions. That is not going to help you out on this test. But if you haven't figured out which one of those two options works best for you, skimming or going straight to the questions, then it's going to be really hard to hit that goal score because you haven't quite figured out what works best for you. And the only way to do that is practice. Try it both ways. I usually start my students by reading the passage because that's how it works best for most kids, but it might not be what works best for you. And so the only way you can figure that out is to practice. All right, guys, so that was my 5 reasons your SAT reading score might be a little bit stuck. Number 1, and this is really the big one, you're getting fooled by attractive answer choices. Don't look for good answer choices. There's always something good about at least 2 answer choices per question. So if you're looking for good things, then it's going to make your life a lot harder. Number 2, you're reading too much between the lines. The authors aren't playing some hidden game where they're not saying what they mean to say. They're almost always saying exactly what they mean to say on the SAT. It's just your job to find that information. It's kind of the opposite of reading in school. In school, oftentimes your teacher does want you to read between the lines, does want that unique reaction. You need to kind of unlearn that for the SAT. Number 3, you're reading too carefully. You're taking too much time on the passage, especially before you get to the questions. They're not going to take it away. You don't need to memorize it. It's an open book test. So you can always get the information you need later once you know what the questions are asking you. So don't take too much time reading through the passage. Number 4, you're focusing too much on the passage and understanding the depths of the passage instead of understanding the details of the questions and the answers. This is all about details. It's only about details. It's not about the big picture. Even the ones that say what's the main point of the passage are about details in the passage. So you need to understand the details of what the question's asking and details of what the answer choices are saying more than you need to actually understand the passage, which is a little bit strange. All right, and number 5, you haven't found the reading style that works best for you. You haven't found out whether you are a kiddo who should be skimming or going straight to the questions. And the only way to do that is to practice and see which way works best for you. If you go straight to the questions and you feel super confused and lost, okay, you should probably be reading the passage first. If you read the passage first and you feel like that takes way too much of your time and you don't really understand the passage anyway because you were just skimming, okay, maybe try going to the questions first. But without practicing and without experimenting, you're not going to know which works best for you. So that's what I wanted to say for today, guys. And again, as always, you can change these things. I promise. You can start looking more at what makes answers wrong than what makes them right. You can stop reading between the lines and just go with the evidence on the page. You can read the passage more quickly and skim. You can focus on the questions and the answers and the details of those rather than the details that are in the passage. And you can figure out which reading style works best for you. So again, this test is something you can study for. You can improve your score. These are the 5 biggest reasons I've seen my students get stuck a little bit on reading and the best ways to fix that. All right, guys, that's all I had to say for today. We'll talk soon. And remember, get some help on this test and kick some butt on this test. Thanks, bye.